The following is an encore presentation of a pre-recorded program. Chats and evaluations were only available during the live presentation. To join one of CJE Senior Life's many live presentations, please visit cje.net/events, call 773-508-1000, or follow us on your favorite social media platform.
First of all, thanks for joining us today. This is our monthly Insights on Aging program. So my name is Lisa Andrews. I'm an LCSW and a clinical supervisor in counseling services here at CJE, and we are the sponsors of this monthly community education program. We want to make sure that everybody is aware that we're offering counseling services via telehealth, on the telephone, or with a video connection, as well as in our Rogers Park and Deerfield offices. We provide individual, family, and group therapy, as well as a variety of support groups. We are following COVID protocols to reduce unnecessary exposure to clients and staff. So if you want more information about our counseling services, how to access them, you can contact us directly or call our main number, 773-508-1000, and you'll get that information when we get the slides. So it is my pleasure to welcome you to this Insights on Aging program, Self-Compassion Through Mindfulness. So if there are any professionals in attendance today, I want to let you know right at the start of the program that we do not offer professional CEUs for this program. These monthly community education programs are offered as part of an effort from CJE and Counseling Services to highlight important aging and mental health issues. Our goal is to provide essential information to individuals and families that we serve. So please be aware that all of our Insights on Aging programs are recorded and available on our website. If you provided an email when you registered for the program, you will be sent a follow-up email with the link to this recording on our webpage. So, Insights on Aging, Self-Compassion Through Mindfulness. Our agenda for today is to talk about mindfulness first, which Kate will share. I'll discuss self-compassion, and then we'll talk about bringing it all together, this idea of mindful self-compassion. And then the last 10-15 minutes, we will kind of reflect on what we've learned and take any Q&As. So Kate, take it away.
Thank you, Lisa. And yes, good morning, everyone. So happy that you're here, and I'm excited to share this information with you. So thought we could start off talking a bit about the benefits of mindfulness rather than launching right into, what mindfulness is. Why even talk about this topic? So you can see on this slide a number of benefits that mindfulness has. It can reduce stress, support your memory, help manage pain, decrease your emotional reactivity. Research over the past several decades has really shown all of these impacts. And this comes about through a phenomenon called neuroplasticity. So that's the brain's capacity to continue growing and evolving throughout your life due to your life experiences. So with mindfulness, we're intentionally putting our mind in a particular type of attention, and that can result in long-term changes in your brain, in your habits of mind that are really exciting. And next slide. However, it is important to note there are all of those benefits, but mindfulness practice may not be good for everyone all the time. It can bring up challenging sensations and memories, particularly for those who have experienced trauma. So it's important to notice if working on mindfulness feels overwhelming or distressing, and to stop if that's happening. You can always talk to a therapist, reach out to our staff to help process what's coming up for you and find other strategies that can support your mental health and well-being. Okay, so we know now why to practice mindfulness, but what is it? The classic definition of mindfulness from Jon Kabat-Zinn is mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So this means essentially having a moment-by-moment awareness of thoughts, feelings, body sensations, surrounding environment, and looking at that awareness through a gentle and nurturing lens. It's being fully present, fully aware, and not overly reactive or overwhelmed by what's going on around us. So you can see in this illustration, the figure on the left has a full mind, a mind full of thoughts, distractions, worries, that is taking them out of where they actually are, this beautiful park on a sunny day. The figure on the right, the little dog, however, is mindful, fully present, fully in that moment. And you can see just by looking at these thought clouds that it looks a lot more peaceful, a lot more calm on the mindful side of things. I think one important thing to note while we are talking about mindfulness, people often conflate mindfulness and mindfulness meditation. So mindfulness meditation is the more formal practice of mindfulness, and we'll talk about that today. But mindfulness is a way of being present, and you can practice that anytime throughout the day. Move forward. So while you're practicing mindfulness, it is normal that your thoughts will wander. That is your brain doing what it's designed to do. It's designed to think. So the practice of mindfulness is acknowledging that your mind has wandered, noticing it, and compassionately returning your attention to your practice, to the present moment. If you're practicing mindfulness, you can expect to repeat this over and over again. That truly is the practice. It's noticing, shifting your attention back, and doing that without judgment, doing that with an accepting, gentle approach. Can move forward. So why be present? What is being present? I think we can all relate to this image, the top image. Why did this happen? Looking back in the past, or I won't be able to cope, that feeling of stress and worry about what's to come. Some people call this rumination, this idea of excessively focusing on something that causes you worry or stress and being kind of stuck in a thought loop about that. So when you practice mindfulness, you're working on changing that habit of your mind and tuning into what you're actually experiencing in the here and now. Can we move on? And the benefit of this present moment awareness, this tuning in, slowing down, interrupting those thought patterns, is that you can start to find a more balanced assessment of your situation. So with mindfulness, you're shifting your awareness from experiencing, being in that thought stream, to observing your experiencing, observing your thoughts. This can help increase your capacity for objectivity, empathy, and bring greater emotional tolerance for challenging states. So you can see in this cartoon that mindfulness doesn't get rid of the problem. It doesn't get rid of that reality. It just helps to find a calmer, more grounded, more manageable approach. And you can also notice in the middle image, just how many different things this person is tuning into. So the light, the room, their body, sounds, breath. There are many entry points to mindfulness, and we'll take a little bit of time in a little bit to practice tuning into some of these different opportunities to be mindful. So you can go ahead. So as I just mentioned, there really are many opportunities to practice mindfulness throughout everyday life. When you wake up, can you, instead of jumping onto your phone, for example, take a moment, take a few breaths, maybe set an intention for the day, check in on how you are. During your shower or other experiences where you might get a lot of physical sensation in, you can pay attention. What does the soap smell like? What does the water feel like on your body? You can do this maybe while brushing your teeth as well, parts of your everyday routine. where you can make the choice to be a little bit more present. While you're cooking or eating, noticing smells, textures, and checking in with your body. How hungry am I, right? And then finally, you can also practice mindfulness in those less pleasant moments, maybe while you're driving, stuck in traffic, maybe waiting in a line. It's a wonderful opportunity to pause, notice how you're doing, and simply be present. So with that being said, like I mentioned, mindfulness, you can get it stronger with a formal practice, with a formalized practice of mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness is like a muscle. So when you're first building a muscle, you start slowly. You try to be consistent and you build over time. And the same principle applies to mindfulness. So we can actually now do a short practice together, just putting this into practice. So you have a few moments to set up for this. First, I'll ask you just to choose an object of focus. What might work for you right now in this moment? You can think about your breath, maybe how that feels in your body, or maybe counting the breath. You can tune into sounds in your environment. Maybe you'd like to do a body scan. So noticing the sensations in your body, scanning from head to toe. Perhaps you'd like to pick up a nearby object and study it. Really get close to it and be with it for 1 minute. For some people, a mental image can be helpful. So you can imagine your mind is a big blue sky and thoughts are just big clouds passing by. For other people, a phrase might be more helpful. I have an example here of I breathe in calm, I breathe out stress. So choose one of these to practice with today, and we'll ask you to practice keeping your attention there for 1 minute. And if your mind wanders, you can simply acknowledge this and return. So you can take a moment to get comfortable, find a good seat, maybe stand up if that's more comfortable. Take on a alert yet relaxed position. If you'd like, you can close your eyes or just soften your gaze down. Soften the muscles in your face. Relax your jaw. I'll mind the time. All you need to do is be present. And with that, we'll start our minute now. Already your mind may have wandered. If it has, that's okay. Just come back. So 1 minute has passed. Before we come back, I'd like you just to take a moment and notice, has anything changed for you? How are you feeling now after spending a minute in this mindfulness practice? With that, I'll pass it over to Lisa for some self-compassion talk.
Thank you so much, Kate. I really appreciate you doing that right before I start speaking. Now I feel centered and grounded. I don't think I've ever done a mindfulness practice using a phrase. So I used the I breathe in calm, I breathe out stress, and that was very helpful. So thank you. So now I'm going to move on to talking about self-compassion. So before we get into self-compassion, I think it's important to think about what compassion itself is. So definitions of compassion include this idea of acknowledging suffering, giving support, having empathy, showing warmth or care. It really is also showing understanding when mistakes are made. And we often think about being compassionate towards others. Self-compassion is simply turning that compassion on towards yourself. So self-compassion involves acting the same way towards yourself as when you're having a difficult time. Perhaps you fail at doing something, or notice something that you don't like about yourself. So instead of ignoring the pain, keeping a stiff upper lip, that kind of mentality, you really stop and tell yourself, this is really difficult right now. And how can I comfort or care for myself in the moment? The way that you might give that kind of empathy and understanding towards others, turning it into what towards yourself. Much of what we'll talk about today in terms of self-compassion comes from a researcher, Dr. Kristen Neff, who's really pioneered some of the most recent research on this topic. She's kind of a self-compassion person. You may have heard her name. She has TED Talks. I'd encourage you to look up some of her stuff. We'll give some more resources at the end, but I'm taking a lot of this from her work, which I like to incorporate into my work as a therapist. So, according to Dr. Kristen Neff, there are three main elements of self-compassion. So mindfulness, which we've already talked about, self-kindness, and common humanity. So the first is mindfulness, being aware of the present moment with openness, without judgment, particularly in moments of suffering when it's kind of harder to do. This means taking a balanced approach. So you're neither suppressing nor exaggerating your feelings. They just are. You are aware of them without judgment. Self-kindness is, like it sounds like, treating yourself with kindness, being gentle with yourself, choosing to be warm and understanding to yourself rather than meeting your thoughts with judgment or criticism or just ignoring pain. It really is kind of tapping into your needs and allowing yourself to give that kindness to yourself. And then the third component that she identifies is common humanity. So recognizing that suffering, mistakes, and life difficulties are part of our shared human experience. No one is alone in being mortal, vulnerable, and imperfect, that this is all part of being human, kind of a way of accepting that painful moments, painful experiences are part of life. And the three of these elements together really capture what self-compassion is all about. So there are some common stumbling blocks when we think about self-compassion. It sounds nice to say, nice to talk about, but some people hear that and think like, isn't that just like letting yourself off the hook, like being nice to yourself, that kind of thing. So here are some common myths about self-compassion. And it turns out when they dug into these ideas, research often shows exactly the opposite. So one of the common myths around self-compassion is that it's a form of self-pity. And what research actually suggests is that self-compassionate people tend to brood less about their misfortune. I think that comes from that idea of common humanity, that everyone has difficult moments, and it just tends to let you have those thoughts and feelings and not be stuck in them. It's also a mindfulness component there. Another myth that we often hear is self-compassion is a form of weakness. Like you've got to be tough and keep a stiff upper lip. What the research actually shows is that self-compassion is actually one of the most powerful sources of coping and resilience available to us when we go through major life crises, and we all do. Self-compassion actually appears to make the difference in our ability to survive and even thrive. That having those elements of mindfulness, self-kindness, and common humanity really help us have strength in those moments. rather than telling yourself you shouldn't be feeling a certain way or you should be responding with more strength. When you give yourself understanding, that allows you to kind of keep going and sometimes even thrive. Sometimes hear the idea that self-compassion will make you complacent. Like it'll all of a sudden you'll become lazy and you won't have any motivation to do things. And it actually, the research shows if you practice it in this way, that it strengthens personal accountability. That's the idea of neither over exaggerating the feelings or saying that you don't have them, just accepting that this is what is helps you feel more accountable. Um, and I think it's an interesting part of this research. Self-compassion is narcissistic, right? That it's all about you and focusing in only on yourself and your pain. Research actually shows that self-compassionate people are better able to remain emotionally stable regardless of the degree of praise they receive from others. And it's that kindness doesn't make you narcissistic. Like it actually helps you remain present, and be able to focus on others. That's that component of shared humanity. We all have difficult times. It's just part of being human. And that self-compassion is selfish. It actually it shows that it helps people sustain the act of caring for others if they have compassion for themselves. Um, there's lots more research, and I think it can be, again, really easy to talk about and say and sounds really nice, but it's for a lot of people, it's not our first go-to when something bad happens. And some of these myths, if I'm kind to myself, I won't I'll be weak, I'll be complacent, I won't motivate. Over the long term, that kindness to yourself actually is more sustaining than the short term of being critical and hard on yourself. Um, so if you are interested, we're not going to do this today. The scoring of the self-compassion scale is a little bit complicated, but on Kristen Nuff's website, selfcompassion.org, she has developed a scale that measures multiple aspects of self-compassion. And these scales are actually free for anybody to use. If you're a professional, it's free to use for your clients. It's been translated in many, many languages, and people use them in research all the time. So this is kind of a validated and reliable scale coming out of her research about self-compassion. So if you're interested in digging deeper, getting a sense of where you are in terms of your self-compassion, things that you might want to strengthen, this might be a scale. You can take this test and have it scored and kind of see what components you might want to delve more deeply into. So I just wanted to show you a couple of the first questions. So the idea is like you answer on a scale of from almost never to almost always. So I'm disapproving and judgmental about my flaws and inadequacies. When I'm feeling down, I tend to obsess and fixate on things that are wrong. When things are going badly for me, I see difficulties as part of life that everyone goes through. When I think about my inadequacies, it tends to make me feel more separate and cut off from the world. Again, those questions are touching into that common humanity component. I try to be loving towards myself when I'm feeling emotional pain. That's a self-kindness question. And when I fail at something important to me, I become consumed by feelings of inadequacy, and like a way of measuring that self-kindness. So again, feel free to use this and dig in. There's a long version, which I think is like 25 or 30 questions. There's a short form. There's a form for kids and adolescents, all kinds of resources that may be a helpful thing if you want to start digging a little deeper. And we're going to follow that up with some practice, another exercise. This is a self-compassion exercise, and you may be familiar with this one. I think it's a really good one. So you're welcome to write this down, to get out a piece of paper and jot things down. Just think of the answers, type them up. The idea is being your own friend. It's a way to really conceptualize increasing your self-compassion, practicing self-compassion. So the first step is think of a time when a friend was struggling with a problem and think about what you would say to them. How do you typically respond to a friend in that situation? And then there's a typo there. So we're thinking about how we respond to a friend in that situation. Note the tone, the words you might use when this person comes to you with an issue. How might you treat them? And the next step is to really think about a time when you were struggling with a problem. How do you respond to yourself typically in these situations? So I'll give you a moment to think about those two things. First, a time when a friend was struggling with a problem, and a time when you were struggling with a problem. Third step is to notice if there's a difference between how you might treat friends when they're struggling and how you treat yourself. And I think often the answer to that is like, yeah, I do. I tend to be more compassionate towards others than I am with myself. And if that's the case, ask yourself why. Kind of delve into what makes that different. I'll give you a moment to think about that while I get a sip of water. The last step is, how do you think things might change if you responded to yourself the way that you typically respond to a friend? What might that shift for you? Maybe you would say the same thing to yourself that you would with a friend, but your tone is gentler. You'd have more kind of understanding. You'd give them a little bit more empathy. You'd give them a little more time to have the feelings that they're having. And it can be a very subtle shift. It might be really radical, but it might be a very subtle shift in how you talk to yourself. Sometimes we tend to think we should respond to a difficult situation differently. But if we saw a friend responding in a way that we didn't think was helpful, we might say something, hey, you're not being so nice to yourself. Like, it's okay. And just to kind of take in, what might you do differently to increase your feelings of care and understanding and empathy for yourself that you probably do to others without even a second thought? And there are lots of other self-compassion practices, again, on Kristen Neff's website. I know Kate will get into this when we're sharing resources, but a resource that I love a lot is this Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook by Kristen Neff. And this therapist named Christopher Germer, he's like the practicing therapist and she's the researcher. They created this book, this workbook that I think can be really helpful. You can go through it with a therapist, you can do it with yourself. Has a lot of these exercises that get into more deeply honing self-compassion and strengthening the ways that we talk with ourselves, the empathy that we have, the mindfulness around that. So I will go on to the next thing. So as I was alluding to, we put them all together. So I will let Kate take it from here.
Thank you, Lisa, for that practice. I think you're right. These are really helpful tools anytime, but especially right now when we're up here presenting, it's a little nerve-wracking. You could be self-critical. So it's really helpful to think through that so thoroughly. So thank you. So yes, how do mindfulness and self-compassion fit together? They're a little different. Mindfulness, generally, it's asking us to pay attention to any and all experience, any and all emotion, positive, negative, neutral. It's noticing that and paying attention with acceptance without attaching anything to it. Whereas self-compassion, as Lisa mentioned, is generally more applied in situations that are difficult, when you're going through something hard, when you're suffering. So they complement one another, but they are different. Mindfulness focuses primarily on acceptance of your experience. Self-compassion focuses more on caring for the person going through that experience. Mindfulness asks, what am I experiencing now? Whereas self-compassion asks, what do I need right now? Mindfulness says, feel your suffering with spacious awareness. Whereas self-compassion says, be kind to yourself when you suffer. Both mindfulness and self-compassion allow us to live with less resistance toward ourselves and our lives. If we can fully accept that things are painful, which inevitably in life, there will be painful experiences that we go through. If we can accept that and be kind to ourselves because they're painful, we can be with that pain with greater ease. So on the next slide, we'll move into another short practice, one that brings together this idea of mindfulness and self-compassion. You'll hear it referred to as metta, which is a Pali term for loving kindness. So the idea is to repeat some phrases of compassion, of loving kindness to yourself. So we'll pull up the video. Yep, I think Lisa's on that. Thanks. And while we're waiting, again, get comfortable, find a good position. And you can go ahead.
So you don't have to sit in a special way, but if you want to, close your eyes, and just take 2 deep breaths in and out, in and out, in and out. Big long breath in and out, and in again and out. And feel yourself sitting here. Feel yourself sitting here. Feel yourself surrounded by all these people. Feel yourself, I hope, happy and content. And think in your mind, a blessing for yourself. The metta practice, loving kindness practice, always begins with a blessing for yourself. So think for yourself, may I feel safe. Think those words in your mind. May I feel content. May I feel strong. May I live with ease.
Thank you, Lisa. And again, in this moment, right after the practice, I encourage you to pause and notice how you feel. Has anything shifted for you? So we'll move into some tips for practice, for bringing this into your life. It is really helpful to bring an attitude of curiosity, experimentation, and self-discovery to these practices. So if something doesn't work for you, that's fine. That's information. The goal is, and Lisa, I think, yeah, thank you. The goal is to find what works for you, and that could change over time. It could change depending on the day. So being curious about that, being curious about your resistance to a certain practice, that's all material to work with in building your mindfulness and your self-compassion. The second bullet point, self-compassion and mindfulness can be challenging. Again, you can find yourself in touch with really difficult emotions and harsh self-judgments. It can help, by practicing these things to build skills and capacities to cope with these difficulties, but be aware that it can go into some tender places. And as we mentioned earlier, be gentle with yourself, back off if it's feeling too uncomfortable, and don't be afraid to enlist someone else in helping you navigate what's coming up for you, a therapist or someone that you can trust with these difficult things. And to that point, allow yourself to move at your own pace. You do not have to push yourself through something if it doesn't feel right in the moment. There's that fine line where we are building tolerance for discomfort through these practices. We are being present and saying, oh, I'm feeling anxious right now, or I'm feeling fidgety, right? But if something is more overwhelming than that, more painful, you do not need to stick with that. You can always come back to it, or again, return to the practice with guidance of a friend, someone that you trust, or with a therapist. Because at the end of the day, these practices are really about making your life better, right? Making your life like have less stress in it, less striving, less work, more enjoyment, more ease. So ultimately, the idea is to find what works for you and what feels good for you. And there are lots of challenges that people encounter with practicing mindfulness. And I would say, especially with mindfulness meditation, again, that more formalized approach where you're maybe sitting or putting some directed energy towards practicing. So one big challenge is having, again, that wandering mind, having distractions come up. Maybe you get bored. That is the practice. You observe what's going on, what's pulling your attention away, and compassionately return to the practice. If there are a lot of distractions, you can consider your environment. Can you make a space that is separate from the rest of your house? Closing a door, asking for some alone time, creating that peaceful environment. But ultimately, our minds will wander, and that's okay.
Can I jump in there, Kate?
Absolutely.
I always think about something that when I was first learning about mindfulness and mindfulness meditation, and taking classes about it in graduate school, we had a professor who said, actually, like, that is the point, to get lost in our thoughts and to return. And that means it's working, but it's not about never getting distracted, but about that practice over and over again of returning to the anchor of your attention, whether that's your breath, the thing you're looking at, whatever the focus is, that's what mindfulness is getting carried away and returning over and over again. It's not necessarily about clearing your mind. There are lots of different types of meditation, but a mindfulness meditation is inevitably will get pulled away and we come back over and over. So that always stuck with me.
Yeah, it's really powerful because it's so common to judge yourself. Oh no, I'm distracted again. Oh, so yeah, those are all opportunities to practice. And it is that muscle. It's that, bicep curl of the mind, of mindfulness. So another challenge that can come up is becoming fidgety and restless, especially if you're doing a seated practice. It's really hard to sit still sometimes. You may have a lot of energy in your body that you'd like to, get rid of or discharge. So a couple of tips here. You could try a shorter practice. There's no need to sit for a long time. Even just 1 minute, as we saw today, that can make a difference. You can also try something more active. You can walk and pay attention to the sensations as you're walking, maybe the sounds around you. You can also practice it with things like eating, like we said before, or brushing your teeth, right? Explore where mindfulness can fit into your life without as much difficulty. And another tip is just to let out some of that energy before you practice. So you can exercise, walk, stretch, whatever that is, so that you can arrive to your practice in a greater sense of calm. So another challenge that comes up quite a bit is falling asleep. I always embrace that. I say that's information. You're tired, you need sleep, right? It's okay, get your rest. So that's one way to approach it. You can also work with it. There are lots of especially guided meditations that can help you fall asleep. So you can kind of build it into that process of transitioning to sleep and see how that changes. Do you get a more restful sleep so that you can be more present for a seated practice over time? And then finally, lack of time. We're all so busy, right? It's important to make mindfulness a part of your routine, or at least that's one strategy. You can think of it as part of your mental health hygiene. So it's like brushing your teeth. It's just a must in your day. And like we've said too, you can fit it into your day. Practice being mindful while you brush your teeth, while you're doing something that you always do every day. Again, you can also try a shorter practice, 1 minute, 5 minutes, that all makes a difference. Or you can break it up into smaller pieces throughout the day, maybe morning, afternoon, and evening. When you catch a break, when you notice you're feeling stressed, right? Find different places where it can fit for you. And you can also make it social. You can ask someone to practice with you, or you can do regular check-ins. How was your practice today? Mine was really tough. I was really distracted, but I did it. Or mine was so peaceful, right? It can be helpful to share it with someone. And I think, yeah, ultimately, if you run into these challenges, it's just don't give up either. It's okay. I think it can be easy to just say, oh, I missed a day, I'm done. But come back. Again, that's the whole practice, right? It's that distraction and coming back. So we have lots of resources here for taking this further. The first point, there are lots of different guided practices that you can use. You can also search around online. There are lots of apps to support you. These are a few practices that really incorporate mindfulness and self-compassion. So I thought they were worth highlighting. And then the last bullet point I really like, it's a meditation hotline. So you can program this phone number into your phone. Sometimes it's easiest just to pick up the phone and call a number, and there are some guided meditations they can lead you through. So that's available to you. It can also be wonderful to practice in community. It gets that appointment on your calendar, and you have others that are in that practice with you. So CJE hosts a weekly mindfulness event on Friday mornings at 10 o'clock with Paul. So encourage you to attend that. You can also read more if you would like to delve deeper. So visit Dr. Kristen Neff's website, selfcompassion.org. As Lisa mentioned, the workbook is really wonderful, full of lots of information and activities you can try. You can also listen to podcasts if you're more of an auditory learner. Tara Brock is she works a lot, again, with self-compassion in particular. There's also a podcast called 10% Happier. I like this one because it's for fidgety skeptics. So people who may have a little bit more trouble coming into mindfulness practice, there's space for you there, and it kind of takes that head on. And then finally, you can bring up mindfulness and self-compassion with a therapist, with a professional who can support you in exploring these practices and bringing them more into your life. Lovely. So with that, we can shift to some reflections, some questions.
Yeah, Kate, I will go ahead and look at the Q&A, the questions that we have here. Feel free to type in questions that you have, or just reflections, or if there are resources that you know of, feel free to share them in the Q&A. So the first question is, how does mindfulness differ from meditation?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So like we said, mindfulness is more of that general orientation towards what's going on. It's that awareness, it's that tuning in. Meditation, it's the idea of focus. So you can meditate on a concept, an idea, right? It's staying with something. So a mindfulness meditation, it puts those two together, and it's intentionally practicing being in the present moment. So mindfulness meditation is a more formal, more structured practice of mindfulness.
I will
Is that-
say,
yeah.
yeah, I think that to me that answers, and feel free to write back if you'd like us to delve in more. I think I've always struggled with like building in a formal meditation practice. I'm not great at practicing what I preach sometimes in therapy, but this idea of mindfulness that gets built into your everyday. I really love that you don't have to have that kind of formal practice where you're closing your eyes. One of the ways I do it is like when I drink my coffee, the way that I make coffee in the morning, I go through a certain routine. I really love going downstairs, turning on, like doing all the things I need to do to get it ready, and then just like holding that warm cup of coffee and just like being aware that like I'm drinking the coffee, I made it just the way I like it. Or maybe it didn't turn out so well, but that's okay. Like building the kind of attention to the present moment where you're doing things that you normally do, as opposed to sitting down, setting a timer, which is also wonderful, that formal practice. But I struggle with that, and I find it more easy to incorporate in the day. So
Absolutely.
oh, I'm gonna, someone commented, we have another question, but I'm gonna jump to the comment first. Somebody suggested that apps on their phone like Calm. I should look on my phone. There's one that I used to use that got discontinued by the App Store that I always recommended to people. But they do have them available on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and type in Stop, Breathe, Think, it's from, they have some really wonderful, like very slightly guided meditations. Do you know of any other apps?
Yeah. So that 10% happier, they also have an app. I use Insight Timer quite a bit.
That's the one I'm thinking of. I couldn't remember the
Yeah.
name.
And you can search YouTube for their practices too. There's also Headspace. I'm sure there are so many more that, but please, I encourage you to put those in the Q&A too. If you have suggestions or resources that you particularly enjoy, we'd love to hear about those and share with others.
I love the Tara Brach podcast, and I think it's like, I don't know if it comes out twice a week, but it's alternating. One episode is like her, she's like a wonderful kind of storyteller. She's like a Buddhist teacher, but then there's a shorter one that comes out too, where it's just mindfulness, like a guided meditation, and she kind of goes back and forth. So you can kind of get this in all kinds of ways. I also find podcasts are so helpful because you can listen when you're driving or like doing chores or running around the house. And that's a way to kind of take all of that in without committing to a formal practice. Yeah, Calm is one of them. Yeah.
Teacher I really like is Sharon Salzberg. She has just a very accessible, warm, welcoming voice that I find has been really helpful. It's made the practice feel more accessible to me. And she has a podcast as well where she interviews different people about their mindfulness practice and what they've learned from it. So it can be really inspiring, I think, to hear from others. Yeah.
Someone just commented that, like, as a person with PTSD, they can sometimes pull themselves out by reciting mantras like "this too shall pass." That, like, I breathe in calm, I breathe out stress. I found that so helpful. But yeah, that kind of holding on to these ideas about your strength and letting yourself be aware that there's pain. That's like that combination, that mindfulness and self-compassion.
Absolutely.
And then someone's asking, so mindfulness doesn't replace therapy. So yeah, I think I can take this one. So mindfulness can be an adjunct to therapy. Like, you can practice mindfulness in so many different ways. You don't need to have the kind of goals or issues going on that you might address in therapy. Anyone can do mindfulness at any time, whether or not you're struggling with your emotions or relationships or different situations. So it doesn't replace therapy, but you don't have to be someone who needs that kind of therapeutic support in order to practice mindfulness. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times the issues that we bring into therapy are being in that stream of thought, being in that kind of reactive space, rather than being able to pause, reflect, and choose your response. So it's a really helpful tool to help strengthen that your ability to kind of step back and choose.
People are welcome to jump in and type in more questions, any reflections they have. I was going to ask Kate, I started learning about this stuff in graduate school. I never really kind of been exposed to it before until I started learning to be a therapist, incorporating it in that way. I was wondering, like, what brought you to it, or what appeals to you, or how you first learned about it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually learned about it from my mom. She was always she was a meditator growing up, and she introduced me to it pretty young. So it's something that I've kind of, come back to in life and kind of veered away and come back. But I noticed how helpful it was as I started to study social work and build my therapeutic skills. I used to meditate on the train every day when I was commuting to work, and it was such a helpful way to start my day and kind of come into work in a centered place. So yeah, that's where it all started for me.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that stuff for kids. I have a young toddler now, and I'm always seeing things about like mindfulness for kids. And he's not at the age where he can do any of that yet. But I think there is something about kind of early exposure, but also, like you said, that neuroplasticity, that there's always capacity for growth and change, no matter our age. Sure, we know kids are developing really fast and their brains change all the time, but that there's never a limit on starting a new practice, learning to do new things, changing the connections that are in our brain. And I think that's what the mindfulness and the self-compassion and the two of them together really allow us to do.
I agree. I can give an example, even just from today. This morning, I was eating breakfast and I just spilled my food on myself. And instead of being really upset, I just laughed and said, well, what an opportunity to, notice here's a little stressor, a little struggle. And you just roll with it and laugh and move forward. These things can come up, all the time. It doesn't always have to be something big, but taking those little moments and using these skills makes it a little bit easier.
Right. The alternative is to kind of berate yourself and be like, oh, what a klutz, I always spill, or like, whatever it is, but turning it into like, well, life happens, that common humanity, that kindness, because often I think it's the feelings that we have about our feelings. Like if you're frustrated, but you get frustrated and angry that you got frustrated, is what makes it harder and kind of sit there a little longer.
Mhm.
And then someone else is saying, give it a try, even if you're skeptical. If you're skeptical, maybe especially if you're skeptical, and it helps surprisingly. And I totally agree. It was never something that really appealed to me until I started kind of doing it and seeing the benefits of it and seeing it, how helpful it can be with other clients, that I was like, oh, I should do this myself too.
Right. And finding what works for you. The same thing doesn't work for everyone. And so taking it and running with it, however it fits in your life, whatever feels good to you.
Yeah, absolutely. There, you can pick so many things for an anchor. I feel like people always say you have to practice using your breath, and like there are so many things that you can focus your attention on, especially if you have breathing issues, or you're just sometimes that can make anxiety more intense if you're just focusing on your breathing. So I like ones that are based on like looking and observing. I did one in graduate school where you just draw a circle over and over again. And like every time you have another thought or a wandering thought, you just make a little mark and then you keep doing your circle. And it was just like thinking about doing it like that, or walking, or all kinds of things. So thank you, everyone. I think we'll conclude now so that we can head out on time. I'll stop sharing so that you can see Kate and I. So again, thank you all so much for attending. So we do these every other month. So the next program will be in March. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that this has been informative and enlightening. And thank you so much, Kate.
Thanks, everyone.